Welcome to the Business Leaders Legacy Podcast, a show where we go behind the scenes of business leaders to uncover their vision, strategies, and challenges they face along the way. My name is Chris Bruner. I'm the CEO of Simple AI Solutions and the host of today's podcast. I'm excited to have Michael Burroughs, President of Burroughs International and Senior Partner and Practice Leader at Shear Velocity. Michael is known for his extensive experience in executive recruiter, coach, and global thought leader on new leader integration, helping organizations and executives succeed through his work at Shear Velocity and Burroughs International. And he is the author of Before Onboarding. And so, Michael, thank you for being here. I'm excited to jump in and talk a little bit more about you and your journey. Please share. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about you, your business, and what you do at Shear Velocity?
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Chris. Um, I have done many things in my professional years. I started off as an Army officer right out of college. I was in the Medical Service Corps. Commanded medical units. Worked on high-level staffs. I was the head of leadership and professional ethics at the U.S. Army Academy of Health Sciences. Taught mid-career officers, and that actually launched my civilian career, because I left active duty after 12 years, entered the private sector, and entered it as an organization development executive, which is basically including leadership development and all the types of things that I did, at the Academy of Health Sciences. And I did that for three different companies. I was the head of OD for three Fortune 500 company divisions of Fortune 500 companies, all of them healthcare related companies, and mainly in information systems, and then also in physician staffing. And then I became an executive recruiter with a top five search firm back in year 2000. I started as a headhunter, and rose up through the ranks at DHR International, which was a firm I worked for, to become managing director of their St. Louis office. And I did that recruiting for 12 years. And during that time, I was also an executive coach, which is something I was doing the whole time I was an organization development executive. And the firm that I work for, DHR, thought it'd be fine for me to just keep coaching, because actually it brought search business to the firm, by some of the companies that I worked with as a coach. And I really enjoyed executive coaching. And so I've been doing that ever since. So between executive coaching and recruiting since the year 2000, that's been my new world. I got outside of the corporate world, and I've been, working for myself and working, for other, smaller firms ever since. And along the way, I developed a process. This was back when I was an OD executive, to integrate new leaders into their jobs. And the reason that I did it is because we were losing a lot of executives that we hired. They came in, they just weren't successful. I had nothing to do with hiring them, but I watched them fail once they came in. And being the change management person and at the firm, I said, look, I'll find a way to fix this. And I created a process for integrating newly outside hired executives, and to make them more successful. And that process was just becoming fashionable at the time, or something like it. The need for it was. There was an author named Michael Watkins at Harvard who wrote a book called The First 90 Days. And in that book, he's basically said, if you don't integrate new leaders coming in from the outside, what they do or fail to do in the first 90 days will make or break them. And
Yeah.
30 to 50% of them, depending on the studies that were done, fail within 18 months. Well, that's a horrible casualty rate,
Yeah.
30 to
Yeah.
50%. And we were
Seriously.
experiencing it in the company that I worked for. So I said, well, I guess this is pretty universal. And that first 90 days being so critical, I developed my process around that first 90 days. And we started implementing it in the company I worked for, and it worked exceedingly well. And
Yeah.
when I went on to become an executive recruiter, I sort of shelved that process, because now I'm recruiting executives. And one of my clients, a search client, I went out to lunch with her. She was the head of HR for this big organization. And I was just telling her about this process I developed when I was an OD executive. And then she came to me a week later and said, "We need a new chief operating officer, and I want you to do the search. But you got to do that process you were telling me about at lunch, where you integrate this new leader. Would you be willing to do that if I gave you the search to do this person?" And I thought, well, sure. I'd never had a client ask for it. I'd never suggested it, but we did it. It was a whopping success. And I said, I
Yeah.
just discovered a new search tool, to be able to integrate the new leaders that we brought in from the outside. I didn't do much of that at the firm that I worked for, but I'm doing it now. And so at Shear Velocity, which is a boutique firm made up of some people from my former firm, they knew that I had written this book, or I wrote Before Onboarding during that period of time. I should mention that, which lays out the whole process for new leader integration. That book was published in 2011, and so it's widely read, 5-star book on Amazon, and it lays out chapter and verse exactly how to integrate a new leader. And so we're doing that at Sheer Velocity. So the searches that we do at Sheer Velocity, we add on a new leader integration process at the tail end of that search.
Yeah.
And we believe so strongly in it that we will give our clients the first one for free. It's a pretty substantial process, but to demonstrate the value of it, we'll do the first one at no additional cost. And if you keep giving us searches and keep wanting to do this, you're going to pay a fee, when we do it, subsequently. But that's our passion right now, and that's our mission. We're going to roll
Yeah.
this out. We're going to be, the kings of new leader integration in the executive search world. Nobody else does it but us, and
Yeah.
the process has been proven over many years.
Yeah. That
And
is
I'm really
really neat.
so I've kind of become an evangelist, for new leader integration. And even though I'm a search person and a coach and all that, I'm really right now talking to you about the real benefit of new leader integration,
Yeah.
to
No,
get.
that's really neat. That's really cool. It's really cool to hear a lot of like your experience and how that got you to where you are right now. Super cool, super interesting. I'm wondering what makes you so passionate about helping these new leaders integrate successfully and excel in their roles, right? Both in the US and abroad.
Well, failure is an expensive thing, Chris.
Hmm.
It's expensive, to the bottom line of the company that brings in a new executive. It's expensive to the executive. Both fiscally expensive and emotionally expensive. If you come into a new job and you all fired up about this new opportunity and it doesn't pan out for you, it can be very disruptive to your family, and all kinds of bad things can happen.
Mhm.
When an executive hire doesn't work out, and not to mention the cost to the company. Everybody, you
Yeah.
know, needs to understand that if you recruited an executive from outside, you probably paid a search firm to do it. That's a third of their first year compensation, your fee right there.
Yeah.
If you had signing bonuses, on top of that, you had stock options that were guaranteed, you start to see all the costs mounting up.
Yeah.
And then that new person comes in, and let's say, well, I can assure you, if they're not properly integrated, often the company will lose other good people because a new
Mhm.
person has come in and they figure, well, I like the old person that was in this job. Now I don't think I'm going to hang around any longer. I think I'll go somewhere else. So now you're losing good people. You
Yeah.
may be missing lost opportunities because the new leader isn't up to speed quickly enough.
It
Does
totally
and,
makes
and so
sense.
a sale doesn't get made or a client gets lost. I mean, there are all kinds
Yeah.
of potential bad things that can happen. And in the course of a year, if that person's not working out within a year, you've racked up a lot of costs,
Yeah.
because this person is not working out. And if 30 to 50% of them don't work out, and they're gone within 18 months, it's not that they got fired, Chris, necessarily. Some of them just quit. They just say, look, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I'm not really happy here, and they can't really understand why they're not happy there. They just leave.
Yeah.
And so the cost, if you multiply that across the board, 500,000 new managers enter the Fortune 500 every year into new roles. 500,000, that's
Yeah.
just in the Fortune 500. That's not the
Yeah.
public sector, that's not hospitals, universities, nonprofits, that's just the Fortune 500. So you can see if you've got a lot of failure, there are all these
Yeah.
costs that people aren't even factoring in. They don't even consider it. They just there's this mentality that I've run into for 20 years now of sink or swim. We bring in a high powered executive like that, and we assume, we meaning the hiring organization, that they don't want any real direction. They just want they just want to be left alone, do their thing, tell them what you want them to accomplish in big picture, and turn them loose. And that doesn't work. You know,
Yeah.
they often bring the successes from their previous job into their current job, and that's not necessarily what they should be doing. They need to be
Yeah.
properly integrated into that job in the first 90 days, exactly what they need to do every 30 days for the first 90 days. And that's what my process is all about.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense. It totally makes sense to hear how much all of those pieces interconnect and intertwine as you bring someone into a role like that. And so that it totally makes sense. It's so crucial, so important. It's really interesting, really interesting. I was wondering if you can maybe share a little bit about like, maybe any new like trends or technologies or things that you're seeing within the executive recruiting, leadership coaching industry, and are you using any of those, and how's that looking, and that kind of stuff?
Well, technology, and as you're, I'm going to broaden the definition of technology. Okay. I mean, technology in the search business, for example, trends in recent years is we include a lot of behavioral assessments. When you bring in a slate of candidates, the ones that the organization really want to focus in on, we'll get behavioral psychologists to come in and find out the level of their emotional intelligence, and how they operate under pressure, and things like that, to kind of add a little more to the quality of the decision that they're going to make on whom they hire. That's becoming more of a trend,
Mm,
in recent years. We do it. We certainly do it, and we include that. Every search that we do at Shear Velocity includes a behavioral psychologist giving the client the rundown on the candidates. So
yeah,
that's new. New leader integration. I mean, I'll call it technology. I mean,
yeah,
it's nobody does it, in
yeah,
the search world, and so we're all about starting a trend, and it obviously be good for business, for the growth of our firm,
of
but
course.
for me personally, Chris, I want to see this implemented everywhere, because failure is not an option for these people.
Yeah,
You want everybody to succeed. It's better for business. It's better for everybody if the new leader comes in and hits the ground running. For example,
yeah,
Michael Watkins in his book, The First 90 Days, said there's something called a break even point, and that break even point is 6.2 months. It takes 6.2 months before a new executive is returning value to the organization that hired them. Up
mhm,
until then, they've been consuming value. Well, who has 6 months to wait for a new leader to get up to speed? Maybe 30 years ago, it was a problem then. It's really a problem now.
yeah,
Everybody wants you to be, up and running almost like the day before you get there, you know.
yeah,
So this process is really, a force multiplier, if you will,
yeah,
in the search business, because it can
yeah,
make the new leaders that get hired do it more successfully. And frankly, Chris, my book it's available to anybody. Our firm is using that process, but I mean, if I were to get my wish 10 years from now, there'd be all kinds of search firms out there doing that. Take my
yeah,
book and just run with it. It's a cookbook. It's a how to. Just do it. New leader integration is so critically important. I want everybody doing it. There's plenty of
yeah.
room out there for a lot of executive recruiters to be doing this.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, and that's really interesting. There's definitely a lot like the importance of this is huge, right? But especially now in our society today, I feel like it's like I feel like I've heard it called like a microwave society. We want like instant gratification,
Mhm. Yeah.
instantly want someone to just be like be up to speed and adding value and all that stuff. And yeah, I feel like having a structured approach to this it is huge for companies. And so yeah, no, that's really interesting. I did want to know, and I feel like it probably speaks into this a little bit, but I want to know like what on the business side of things, what is currently working really well within your business?
Within our business, I think, let's just talk about the executive recruiting piece of it. It's a highly relational business.
Mm,
And the more of these searches an executive recruiter does, the more experience they get, and the more their judgment improves and all that. So, what really works well for our firm is everybody that works at Shear Velocity is a mature, experienced executive recruiter. And they tend to work in certain niche markets. For example, I'm a generalist in the last 20 years, but because of my healthcare background in the Army, and I'm focused in my practice right now as an executive recruiter on working with physicians who are in leadership positions. I coach a lot of doctors in leadership positions as an executive coach. And there's just world of opportunity out there. A lot of physicians don't come into a management job with a lot of management experience. They're
mm,
physicians. They've been clinicians their whole career, and all of a sudden
yeah.
they get tapped to be the department chair of whatever department they work in. And it's been a coaching target rich environment for me because these people need a lot of help typically. But as in the recruiting world, bringing those people in, if we integrate them, we recruit them and bring them in and integrate them, and then coach them after the integration process. It's kind of a three-legged stool. Recruit that physician leader, integrate that physician leader, coach that physician leader, and because my background, formative years were spent in healthcare, I figure, and I've proved this numerous times, outcomes improve, healthcare improves, the bottom line to the hospital improves, patient care improves if that organization is working more smoothly together with a
Yeah.
properly integrated new leader who hits the ground running and builds on
Yeah.
a team that trusts that person. Trust is a very important part of our process and new leader integration.
Yeah, no, and that is difficult, and it's so important, right? So important, especially in healthcare. I feel like it's having a someone who is in that leadership role and up to speed and doing it the right way is so important because
Mhm.
healthcare, it doesn't matter, it's constantly going, it's constantly moving, it's
Yeah.
constantly evolving, right? And it's getting more and more, technology and new studies and new this. And so yeah, having someone, yeah, that's so
But
important.
Chris, it's all the technology is definitely, coming into health, and AI is having its impact in healthcare too. But leadership's a very human thing. I mean, I talk a lot about the difference between leadership and management. Management's a controlling process. You control resources, time, money, space. Leadership's an influencing process. You
Mhm.
influence people,
Yeah,
and you do that through communication. And so
so good.
communication is a medium for leadership. And so if I'm coming in and working, with bringing in a new physician and integrating that person, then I'm affecting something technology doesn't really affect, you know,
Mm,
because and let's say I do a lot of work with emergency rooms, emergency department directors. The ER is the front door of a hospital. There's a lot going on there, and and
mhm.
and a lot of things that can go right, a lot of things that can go wrong, and how well that team communicates with each other and works together in the emergency room is vitally important. I ran into that in the Army. I mean, military healthcare is pretty hectic place to be, and
Yeah.
so everybody's got to be hitting on all cylinders, and the physicians that are running that particular trauma area have to be, good leaders, and people willingly follow them, and everything just falls right into place. Well, my coaching process does that. I've coached a lot of ER directors, and recruiting and integrating them just makes everything just work better. And I can sit back here as an English major, as a college student, and say, hey, look, I'm actually affecting patient care by just making these people work more effectively together and bring in the right people and all that. So I get a lot of excitement out of that, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah. No, I totally agree. I did wanna shift a little bit and talk a little bit about challenges. Every business goes through challenges. I'm wondering if maybe you can share a problem that you guys are facing, maybe like, within the business, maybe like a bottleneck or, something taking up too much time or, anything like that,
Yeah. Well,
any
I
challenge.
could tell you from having worked for 3 different search firms and having actually had my own, the process of getting business is what executive recruiting is all about. People think of you doing the search. They don't realize that nothing happens until you get a client to hire you to do a search. So business development is the challenge that all search firms have. And generally speaking, the executive recruiters are doing their own business development. And the processes that they go through doing that tend to be 1970s, 1980s way of doing it. I mean, now LinkedIn has made it a little easier to reach out to people and things like that. But what we're discovering, and we're doing it at Sheer Velocity because I'm actually piloting it, is how do we take artificial intelligence and build it into the business development process?
Mm.
How do we reach out? In my case, let's just use an example. I need to be speaking with CEOs of hospitals. I need to be speaking with chief medical officers of hospitals. So how do we reach out to them, and how do we get that message to them, and how do we get them to be able to spend just a few minutes with me in a Zoom
Start
call
the
like this,
conversation.
just even talking about the need
Yeah.
for integration of new physician leaders? And technology is making it, AI is making that possible. And
Mhm.
we're addressing the challenge of getting more business, you know, uh, by using AI.
Yeah.
I guess one of the reasons I smile about it is because I'm the one leading that charge at Sheer Velocity. And then how
Yeah.
well we do it with me will determine how my colleagues choose to do it themselves. And it'll be a real, uh, it'll be a big change to how we do business going forward. And
Yeah.
I imagine right now there are other search firms that are doing the same thing. That have realized just because of people like you reaching out, for us to be podcast guests for you, that they're all starting to see there's got to be a better way to communicate your value to your potential clients than just the old way of smiling and dialing, or
Yeah.
LinkedIn messages that never get read, and things like that. So
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of technology out there nowadays that are helping with, just starting those conversations, because that's
yeah, yeah.
that's half the battle is just getting to the right people and starting a
You
conversation. And
nailed it.
so,
You nailed it. The right
yeah,
people start the conversation. It doesn't have to be a
yeah,
long conversation. If you got value, if you got a value
yeah,
proposition, and they have pain that needs to be alleviated, then things get moving. But until you have that conversation, nothing happens.
yeah. No, yeah, that totally makes sense. Well, I'm excited to hear more about it. I did want to know like a little bit more of like when you think of the future, like where do you see yourself, within the next 6 months to a year, your business, like are there any goals that you're focused on achieving or
Yeah.
like where do you see yourself?
Well, 2026 is a breakout year for me personally. It's a breakout year for Sheer Velocity because we're doing these new things. I
Yeah.
mean, just be appearing on your podcast. Nobody at Sheer Velocity has ever been on anybody's podcast. I've been on 10 now. I mean,
Yeah.
this message is getting out. And so our goal is to, by the end of the year, that all of the Sheer Velocity executive consultants who want to do new leader integration as part of their search business will have been given the opportunity to do it. We'll have the business. They'll shadow me. I'll train each and every one of them in how to do it, although it's really right there in my book. And then by 2027, that's when the fruit will
Yeah.
be born. At that, I mean, now, if this is positioning year for us, using AI technology to get more business, adding this feature, this new leader integration feature to our practice, some coaching on the tail end of that, and then by 2027, just start reaping the crop, and
Yeah.
and making it something we all do.
Yeah, no, well, that's really exciting. That is really exciting. I'm excited to see where you go and how it comes and just the growth, the potential. I feel like was such a valuable asset of focusing on that the process to really get a leader in and get them onboarded well and all that stuff. So cool. That's really exciting. I did want to take a moment and let you share a little bit more about where people can find you, where they can hear more about what you're doing with Sheer Velocity and stay involved and possibly, like contact you for services or anything like that. Where can people find you?
Well, hopefully you'll add a little of this, below, the podcast, and you'll, let people be able to refer to, to this, but I do two things. I'm an executive coach. I've been for a quarter of a century. Burroughs International is my coaching business, and you can reach me at any time there at Michael at burrowsinternational.com. My website is burrowsinternational.com. But the focus for this year and the next few years is really on the executive recruiting and integration piece. And with that, I'm the senior partner at Shear Velocity. We're a Denver-based firm, got offices in multiple cities in the U.S., and then we're also affiliated with other organizations in 30 different countries. So search and integration is my focus, and shearvelocity.com is the website. My email address at Shear Velocity is mburrows at shearvelocity.com. Reach out to me. I check my email all the time. LinkedIn, I'm Michael Burroughs on LinkedIn. Got a pretty substantial LinkedIn profile, and you can always reach me through messaging on LinkedIn. And that's the best way. Two different email
Awesome.
addresses and my LinkedIn profile. The book is on Amazon. You can, Before Onboarding, How to Integrate New Leaders for Quick and Sustained Results. It's a 5-star book, been that way since it came out in 2011. Get it, it's 120 pages. You can read it in 2 hours. It's a how-to book.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That is awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, Michael. I before I'd like to ask one last question,
Sure.
right? Since
Yeah.
this is the Business Leaders Legacy podcast, and you being the president of Burroughs International and senior partner of Sheer Velocity, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
I want new leader integration to become a common practice in any organization that values leadership.
Mhm.
And in so doing, leadership will become more and more important in the private sector than it has been. I mean, it's private sector is very management oriented, and I want to see leadership and management be kind of more on an equal plane and implementing new leader integration. If you talk about legacy, I mean, when I'm sitting in a rocking chair, thinking back to what I'm leaving this world, I want a lot of organizations integrating new leaders, and everybody that does it will benefit from it. And so
Yeah.
that's the legacy I hope to leave.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, thank you again, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Mhm.
To all of our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe. This is the Business Leaders Legacy podcast. Go check out Michael and what he's got going on, and we thank you for tuning in. Thank you again, Michael.
Thank you, Chris.